Karen called 911 because I changed my own door locks and claimed she runs the neighborhood. You won't believe what happened next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. It was a typical Sunday afternoon when I decided to tackle a small project I'd been putting off for weeks: the door locks. After several failed attempts to get a locksmith scheduled, I figured I could change the locks myself. The previous owner had left the house in a rushed move, and although I'd already replaced most of the old fixtures, the locks on the front and back doors still felt a bit dated. I grabbed my tools and set to work, unaware that the simple task I'd planned would soon escalate into a nightmare. The sun was shining, birds chirped in the distance, and the neighborhood seemed peaceful, as it always had been since I moved in. As I twisted the first bolt off the door, I felt a sense of accomplishment. There was something satisfying about taking control of your own home, fixing things yourself instead of waiting around for others to do it for you. I smiled to myself, thinking how nice it was to finally feel like I was putting down roots in this new place. But then came the knock. I stood up, wiping my hands on a rag. At first, I thought it was one of my neighbors stopping by to introduce themselves, maybe offering a friendly word of welcome. But when I opened the door, I wasn't met with the neighborly smile I expected. Instead, I was face to face with a woman in her mid-40s, standing with her arms crossed, wearing a look of absolute disapproval. Her name was Karen, and I'd heard rumors about her from the other neighbors. She was an outspoken member of the homeowners association, and people referred to her as the neighborhood watch of sorts, except instead of making sure the streets were safe, she seemed to think it was her job to enforce the unwritten rules of the neighborhood. "You can't just change the locks like that," Karen said sharply, her eyes scanning the door as if I had committed some kind of unforgivable crime. Taken aback, I blinked. I'm just changing the locks on my own door. "That's not how we do things here," Karen replied, her tone condescending. "You need permission from the HOA first. Do you even know the rules around here?" I stared at her, trying to make sense of the situation. "It's my house," I said slowly. "I don't need permission to change my locks." "Well, if you're going to live here, you better learn who runs this neighborhood," she shot back, her voice sharp and accusatory. Before I could respond, Karen held up a clipboard as if it was some kind of evidence. "You're breaking HOA rules, and I'm the one who enforces them. Don't you understand?" My patience was beginning to wear thin. "I'm sorry, but I don't believe you have the authority to tell me what I can or cannot do to my own property." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I'm a board member. I know the rules. I run this neighborhood." She stepped forward, and I could feel the tension in the air. "Actually, the HOA runs the neighborhood," I corrected her. "Not you personally." But she wasn't listening. As if her presence was all the validation she needed, Karen walked back down my front steps, her voice rising with each word. "You've made a big mistake, and you'll regret it," she muttered under her breath. As though I had just made an enemy for life, I shrugged off her words. After all, she was just one woman with too much time on her hands. The locks were my concern, not hers. But Karen wasn't done. I should have known the trouble wasn't over when I saw her retreating toward her house across the street, making hurried calls on her phone. Still, I went back to my work, focused on getting the new lock installed before dinner. That's when I heard the sirens. A few minutes later, I looked up and saw flashing red and blue lights reflected in my front window. It was a police car. What on earth could she have called the police for? I walked out of my house to meet them, my mind racing. As I approached, the officer in the driver's seat rolled down his window. "Ma'am, we've had a report about some suspicious activity." "Suspicious activity?" I asked, dumbfounded. "Yeah," he said, clearly looking at me with some confusion. "Someone called 911 saying you were tampering with your locks. Is everything okay here?" It was hard not to laugh. "Yes, officer, everything's fine. I'm just changing my door locks." The officer's expression softened a bit. Well, we just need to clear things up. Apparently, someone thinks you're violating the HOA's rules. My heart sank. Karen had actually called the police on me over changing my locks. It was as absurd as it was irritating. I explained the situation to the officer, who nodded and made a note of it. I'll need to speak with the person who called it in, the officer said. And soon enough, Karen appeared, her face smug as ever. Karen strutted up to the officer and me like she was the one in charge. I'm the one who reported this. She's breaking HOA regulations by changing the locks without our permission. The officer gave her a polite but firm look. Ma'am, there's no law that says she can't change the locks on her own home. The HOA may have guidelines, but they're not enforceable by law enforcement. Karen wasn't having any of it. She needs to understand that we run this neighborhood. I run this neighborhood. I couldn't help but roll my eyes. The officer seemed to lose patience with her antics. Ma'am, you can't just call 911 for every little thing that bothers you. We're done here. Karen opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself when she saw the officer was no longer entertaining her claims. With a huff, she turned on her heel and marched back to her house. With the police on their way out and the whole situation diffused, I thought that would be the end of it. I resumed my work on the locks, feeling a strange sense of victory. It was absurd how one woman's power trip could almost derail a simple home improvement project, but as I tightened the last screw, I heard a faint voice from the street. Karen stood there, her arms crossed once again, watching me from across the road with a scowl on her face. She wasn't done with me yet. Over the next few days, Karen's passive-aggressive behavior intensified. She would pass by my house several times a day, glaring at me. I wasn't sure what she thought she could achieve, but I refused to let her intimidate me. The situation became more personal when I received a letter in the mail from the HOA. Apparently, Karen had submitted a formal complaint against me, claiming I had violated HOA rules by making unauthorized changes to my property. I knew this was just another attempt to assert control, but I wasn't about to back down. I gathered all the necessary paperwork, including the original homeowner's agreement, and set a meeting with the HOA board. At the HOA meeting, Karen was seated at the table, ready to argue her case. But I was prepared. With all the documents in hand, I calmly explained the situation and pointed out the lack of legal grounds for her claims. The rest of the board, most of whom were neutral but firmly believed in fair application of the rules, listened intently. Karen's attempts to dominate the conversation fell flat when the board president spoke up. Karen, we understand your concerns, but we can't enforce rules that aren't written down. We can't tell someone how to maintain their property, especially when it's not a safety issue. Karen's face flushed red. She tried to argue, but it was clear she was losing ground. In the end, the board sided with me. The HOA had no jurisdiction over my personal property changes unless they affected the structure of the house in a way that violated safety codes, something that simply wasn't the case here. As I left the meeting, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. Karen had overplayed her hand, and I had stood my ground, but as I walked out of the building, I could hear Karen muttering behind me, "This isn't over." I smiled to myself. Maybe it wasn't over for her, but for me, the battle was won. I wasn't going to let anyone, Karen or anyone else, tell me how to run my own home.